Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phil and Nick Stevens. And we are coming to you here on the last week until the fall without any regular season baseball whatsoever because the major leagues and the AAA Norfolk Tides will be starting next week. And as we gear up for the regular season, we think that this is the perfect time to take questions from our listeners. So this week, we're going to do that over 2 episodes. Part 1, which will be this episode, will focus on the major leagues. And part 2 will focus on the minor leagues and give us an opportunity to preview the 2 seasons, majors and minors, coming up here. And with that, I'm going to dive into one of the bigger topics coming out of spring training, which is the performance of Kyle Stowers, because one of our listeners and loyal patron, Bobby, wants to know what's going to happen with Kyle Stowers. Now, Bobby got this question in before Stowers hit 3 home runs against the Pirates on Sunday. I don't know if he saw that coming or not, but I'll just go ahead and start this off with Bob. What is going to happen with Kyle Stowers?
First of all, I love the name of our patron there, Bobby. It's a great name. But as for Kyle Stowers, I don't think anything has changed other than props to him for going out and performing, putting his power on full display, whether it's for the Orioles as an injury emergency backup in AAA, or if it's, hey, a team comes calling, loving what they're seeing and seeing what it would take to get him. I think it's good for him regardless. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be, I don't think it matters if he batted 1,000 with 20 home runs this spring. Well, maybe at that point he would probably force his way onto the team. But my point is that you have Cowser along with Hayes, Santander, Mullins, McKenna, Kjerstad, Mateo, Sam Hilliard. He's gone. But you have a lot of options for the outfield. And Kyle Stowers is probably 6th on the list. So he's like, if they go with 5 outfielders, he's 1 injury away from getting a shot. But unless they do something unpredictable, like trade a Ryan O'Hearn or option a Ryan O'Hearn or trade Ramon Urias and don't give the spot to a Kobe Mayo, like something crazy happens, maybe Kyle Stowers makes it. But from now, I'm happy for him that he's performing, but I'm not sure that it changes anything as far as what we are expecting from him to start the year, at least.
I agree. I think he starts the year in AAA. Just you're not going to run him out there in center field, so you're going to want Cowser is playing his way onto this roster, and I think if he is on the major league roster, he's going to get some regular run. You've got Mountcastle, Santander, and Adley on his days off from catching that are going to be getting DH at bats. Ryan O'Hearn there as well. So like you can't say like Stowers can even be like the primary DH to get him at bats. And you don't want a guy like that just kind of sitting away on the bench. I don't think. I think if you got to choose between the two, you want him down in AAA getting regular at bats to stay ready in case there is an injury or something. It just comes down to like there are too many deserving players and not enough spots. And a 3 home run day in spring training is awesome, but it doesn't move the needle, unfortunately. Like Kyle Stowers is still the same Kyle Stowers we saw a week ago. This roster is still pretty much the same as it was when we were talking a week ago. Like guys that should be getting major league at bats are going to be in Norfolk to start the year. And as much as it sucks for those guys in their careers, like it's really awesome for the Orioles that how many other teams, if they need to dip into AAA depth, can say, oh, we've got Connor Norby, Heston Kjerstad, who I think starts the year in AAA as well, Kyle Stowers, Kobe Mayo. Like that depth can make a huge difference. And it's like, imagine being upset that Kyle Stowers or Kobe Mayo or Heston Kjerstad, or likely all 3, doesn't make the major league roster. It's like, what a catastrophe for Orioles fans. How will we survive this trying time? It's an amazing problem to have. And honestly, it's kind of laughable that the kind of conversations we're having about this roster compared to just 2 years ago. It's awesome.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I still, as great as Stowers' performance was on Sunday and as great as it has been in camp, I think that right now Colton Cowser I will have the advantage because of the center field defense, because of some of the things that he can do a little bit better than Stowers. We know that Stowers can hit home runs. He's been doing it since his days at Stanford. The Orioles know that, and I think he's showing himself to be a better overall hitter. But I don't think they're bringing him up to occasionally play right field and occasionally DH and sit on the bench the rest of the time. And while I thought they might do that early on with Kerstad because they had given him some opportunities late last year, I think Calzer has an advantage over both of them right now.
Yeah, I mean, especially because I feel like the team must have said to Colton, here's what we want to see from you come spring. Go work on this, and let's see if you've been able to take that learning experience and improve upon it. And he's done everything and more that they could have asked of him coming into spring after an abysmal start to his major league career, which we know that's not exactly indicative of the type of player that he is and will be. And yeah, he's earned a role on the team, whether it's, I'd hate to have him be on the bench, but I feel like even if he's quote unquote not a starting outfielder to begin the year, I'm sure he'll get in 3-4 games a week at least early on in the season and hopefully earn more playing time from there. I think I predicted that he would start off on the bench as a role player, then become a strong side platoon partner for Austin Hayes. And I'm still sticking with that. Calzer's been awesome.
All right, here's an easy one. I feel like we've talked about this every episode for the last 3 weeks, but we've had some more games. We're getting closer. From Dr. 2K, does Jackson Holiday, make the opening day roster? Zach?
Yes. I'll just leave it there. Yes.
Yeah, I think so. It is funny that it's like it's all anyone's talk about this camp, and rightfully so to an extent, because it's pretty fast rise for a guy just turned 20 years old, first number 1 pick in the draft. But yeah, I mean, unless Colton Wong is going to beat him out of a starting job at second base, which I don't think so. Yeah, it seems pretty evident that they basically told him it's your job to lose, and he has not lost it. You don't love the strikeout to walk ratio like we talked about last week, but he did walk against Spencer Strider a couple days ago. Also hit a ball hard off Strider in that game. Yeah, so he's done everything as far as not losing the job. And I think, Orioles fans are excited for a reason. He's a super talented young player. I'm excited to see him out there. Yeah, he's going to be there.
Yep, he is on the opening day roster. That's all I got as well.
All right, we'll move on now to another question from Dr. 2K. What is Ramon Urias' trade value around the league? And Ben, in tandem with that, wants to know chances we move on from Ramon Urias before the season starts. Let's go straight back to Nick.
Urias' trade value, I don't think it's very much. Like I truly think this is another example of like player X provides more value to his current organization than another. And what are you going to get out of Ramon Urias at this point? I don't think it's very much. I know he's been better against righties than lefties, so you got that platoon aspect maybe isn't there for him, but he's a veteran player who plays multiple positions, and he plays positions where you're going to have likely have rookies or young players going to be at the helm of this year. So like I have a hard time believing that this team rolls out a bunch of rookies at the same time. We've said a million times how Westberg had a very even keel debut last year, which was a good thing. He didn't have that Grayson or that Calzer struggle that he got to be sent back down to AAA, but there is a book on him now, and it is going to be his first full year in the majors. So he's not a proven veteran yet. Calzer's earned a shot. Holiday's earned a shot. Mayo has earned a shot as well, but Mayo can't play second base, and he's improving in big ways and step by step, doing exactly what you want to do. But I feel like we're going to talk about Kobe Mayo a lot in this episode, but I think it's very easy to see how the organization can put him in AAA. They keep Ramon Urias and some vets on the big league roster. You can stagger the rookies throughout the year, and if it's me, Ramon Urias is gone yesterday for an 18-year-old Dominican Summer League pitcher, or maybe two of them, and Mayo's a starting third baseman. But I think the Orioles have to see enough in Mayo's data and their analysis to really believe that he can be an everyday starting third baseman at the major league level. And until then, I think they're going to roll with Ramon Urias. I don't know. I think it's fine. And then when Kobe Mayo is fully ready in the organization's eyes and they're ready to move on from him, and at that point you want to trade him for a couple low minor flyers, so be it. But I think that's probably about all you're going to get. What was Ben's question there? Chances we move on from Reese before the season starts? Like I just said, I think it's very minimal. He's playing very well this spring. Brandon Hyde loves him. I see no reason why you need to move on from him right now. But
yeah, I agree with everything that Nick said. And to tack on to that, I would point out that it would be very unlike Mike Elias to move Ramon Arias right now. And one of the reasons is that I don't think he'd really be dealing from a position of strength, because Arias is coming off a year where he was pretty solid at the plate, but the defense took a step back, and I think a lot of that was because of the injury. He had the knee injury early last year. He had a couple of other injuries along the way, and I feel like that did slow him down at third base a little bit. So let him go back out. Let him look a little bit closer to 2022 Ramon Arias and help you ease these rookies into, everyday roles or semi-everyday roles at the major league level. I'm not in a huge rush to see the Orioles trade Arias because we saw it last year. If someone is hitting well at AAA and they think they can help the team win now, they'll bring that player up and they'll play him ahead of Ramon Arias. They did that with Jordan Westburg last year. They'll do it again this year. So I would say right now, to kind of answer both questions directly, the first part of that from Dr. 2K, not enough to make the Orioles want to move Arias right now. And then the second part of that, can never say never, but I'd maybe give it a 5 to 10% chance.
I am a little bit higher on the chances that Arias is traded. I would put it like 25-30% chance, which is not a majority. I don't think it's going to happen, but I could totally see it. I guarantee they're at least looking into what they could get for him. And I would imagine that they could get, like Nick said, maybe a couple flyers in either the, rookie league ball or low A. But I wonder if they could get a guy who's similar in major league service time, but maybe a relief pitcher as opposed to like a utility part-time player on offense like Urias, maybe a guy who's entering his first year of arbitration that's out of options, a decent reliever. Maybe they could get someone like that. I'd love to see it happen because I want to get as many of these young players up in the major leagues as quick as possible, especially with that light early schedule that we've talked about. But I do think the most likely scenario is Ramon Arias is on this team to start the season. And I like him. He seems like a good dude. He's a solid player, but there's just more exciting guys that obviously we want to see. So no shot against him, but hopefully he is traded.
So we'll go off of that one and go to a question here from Vivek, which is, do we see a minor trade before opening day? And then to add on to that, do we see a waiver claim before opening day? And I'll go back to Bob for this one.
I think there will definitely be a waiver claim. There might even have been a waiver claim since he posted that question. What is Peyton Burdick? When did we do that waiver claim? But yeah, I think especially because I think the last spring training game is Sunday, and then there's 3 days off in a row before opening day. I could totally see either a waiver claim or a minor trade like with Danny Coulombe last year. And yeah, I would definitely take over 50% chance that at least one of those two things will happen. I'd say a minor trade that is kind of similar to what they've been doing, maybe a slightly bigger deal than like these guys where they're just jumping the waiver line, but maybe like a guy that they think they could sneak through. They'll jump the line, trade for him for cash or a minor leaguer and take the chances.
Yeah, we're going to see something. As teams settle their rosters, we know Mike Elias and his staff are really good at scouring the waiver wire and finding somebody. You can always continue to look at this bullpen and try to grab more arms, try to grab more guys that maybe you think you can slip through waivers when you acquire them. Picking a specific player is obviously an impossible exercise because it could be one of 100 different players. But I'm sure that will be someone. My first thought was the idea that, yeah, it's probably the trade like Bob mentioned, but it is that kind of trade that where you're paying, a couple grand to another team to skip the line in the waiver wire. Because what are the Orioles are probably in the back of that line, right? Not fully understanding of how that whole process works when he gets reset or whatever, but I imagine the Orioles will have to jump some guys, some other teams if they want to grab somebody. So I could see them making that kind of move. Odds are it's probably going to be a reliever, some type of pitcher that they've identified that they like, but
Yeah, that's what would happen if you see a move at all. And I would definitely not rule out this front office making a waiver claim. And it may be a waiver claim where it could be a very minor cash considerations trade, but regardless, would definitely not rule something out between now and next Thursday.
all right. Here's a fun one. Could this be who you got as the last bullpen arm even? But back to Bobby Jones here with another question. Really just a statement more so. Vespi versus Aiken. And then I would think, was that Vivek who added versus Crook as well? Throw him in the mix. So Vespi versus Aiken versus Crook. Take that as you will, Zach.
So I think Vespi versus Aiken is a little tough because they're really not going to serve the same role. Vespi is going to be more of a short outing guy that you bring in probably middle innings, whereas I think the Orioles see Aiken more as their bulk reliever solution, which is why I think of the two, Aiken is more likely to make the opening day roster because you got to be able to plan for needing that extra arm in the bullpen early in the year that can give you length, because chances are you're going to have some starts mixed in there where the starter does not go very long. So if we're going to look at it on who's more likely to be on the roster short term, I think it's going to be Aiken for that reason. I'm a little bit more of a believer in Vespi stuff when Vespi is at his best, which has been from time to time in the major leagues. Aiken, we know what we have, which is that if he's throwing strikes and inducing a lot of soft fly balls, he's going to be fine. But if he's not, the outing could get a little ugly. So I think that the Orioles will go with Aiken for the innings aspect. And then Crook, I'm kind of intrigued. I don't see him as a guy that the Orioles go to right away. But if nothing else, another bullpen arm down in Norfolk. And if he's able to go back to AAA and get the walk numbers down from where they were last year, he's probably a candidate to come up either as someone who can give you a short outing or who can go a little bit more, give you a little bit more length because he does have starters experience in the minor leagues. So I think Crook within a few months could be an interesting option.
Yeah, for some reason I don't trust Crook. I can't put my finger on why. No, I actually am really intrigued by him. Seems pretty similar to Vespi as far as, doesn't have that velocity on the fastball, but he's got good slider, good breaking stuff. Yeah, I think Aiken has the edge for now, especially Hyde's comments. Basically, like it's the best he's ever looked. He loves him, and I think he came out after that and pounded the strike zone and had a great performance as well in a spring training game. So I'm expecting him to start the season in the bullpen, and hopefully he does well. But if he does have an option, which I think we've figured out he does, I could easily see Aiken, Vespi, and Crook all just kind of swapping in and out all year around as arms are needed or performance dictates. So, yeah, I would go Aiken. Then I'd probably put Crook second just because I feel like they saw something in him, and he looked good to me in his spring training outings. And Vespi's look great as well. So it's really all three of these guys look good. So, yeah, I think we'll see them all in the big leagues, but Aiken gets the edge for now. And sorry, I forgot you didn't answer.
Oh, okay. It's Aiken. For me, it's been the same Aiken for the last 2-3 weeks. I think he makes this roster as well. The organization clearly likes him. Like, spring stats, matter unless they don't. They got to fit your narrative or whatever. But with Keegan Aiken this spring, like 7 1/3 innings, 1 walk, 1 hit, 10 strikeouts. Like that's huge. It's been really good to see. You mentioned Hyde's comments the other day that he looks like he's throwing well. I mentioned the numbers before. I think there was some injury. He had the injuries as well last year. How much did that play a role into it? But even then, you dig a little deeper. Aiken was putting up some pretty good numbers last year as well, trending much better than in years past. You look at the his baseball savant page from last year. I know some points he doesn't even qualify for because he only had like 20 something innings. Some of it's not good, not really good at all. But if you go back to 2022, there's a lot of bright red there for Keegan Aiken. Maybe he can get some of that form back. But really, just I guess take the opportunity to just shout out Nick Vespi. I don't really know how much we've talked about Vespi lately. We trying to focus more on the majors, have a major aspect of this as well now that more of these younger guys are in the major leagues. But I think all the credit in the world to Nick Vespi. Like, that's not a shot at him at all. This kid was like a starter in Delmarva in 2019 and was good, struck out a lot of guys, wasn't walking that many guys, was performing well. But then, was that 2018? Yeah, 2019, he was a starter in Delmarva. Minor league baseball doesn't happen in 2020, comes back in 2021. He skips Aberdeen, goes to Bowie. He's lights out in Bowie's bullpen, gets to AAA, kind of struggled a little bit in that first taste. But ever since then, 2022 on, the guy's been lights out in Norfolk and has been reliable as an up and down option for the Orioles. I just think he's got one more year that the Orioles can play those games with him, the up and down game. I think that's going to be his role this year. And then we'll see is he traded at the end of the year because he's going to be out of options, or does he do enough to prove that, hey, this time next year, we're talking about Vespi making the opening day roster because he doesn't have an option? Or is he, start that routine of, he bounces around from team to team, gets a shot, gets DFA'd, gets claimed, goes elsewhere. I don't know. We'll see what happens, but he's the development with Nick Vespi, and he's pushing 30 now. He's 28, 29 years old. He continues to develop and make changes to his repertoire and make changes to his body physically to try to get better. And it's showing. So I think credit to him as being a really valuable depth option for this bullpen.
Breaking news. Thank you, Robert Hunt. I did not see this. Blake Snell to the Giants for $62 million, 2-year deal with an opt-out after this year. Keep sending these awesome pitchers to the NL. Cool. I love it. Yankees don't get him. No American League team does. You got to love it. But I'll go on to my next question now, which is from Ben. Have we seen Ryan McKenna's last regular season game with the Orioles, Zach?
No, we haven't. And I'm going to say that because although I don't think that he's going to make the opening day roster, if he makes it through waivers and starts the year back at Norfolk, he will be back in the major league at some point this year because he can play center field, and he's the kind of guy that you don't mind sticking on the bench for a couple of weeks because someone else is hurt. I think if you have a long-term injury, McKenna's not your guy. And I don't think that he could go down there and hit 330 and convince them that he's somehow a different player. But I do think that if you have, just kind of the situation you had last year where Cedric Mullins gets hurt for a little bit and you need someone else who can play center field, you'll bring McKenna up because you don't mind sitting McKenna on the bench for the better part of 2 weeks as your emergency center fielder, whereas you're not going to do that with one of your top prospects. So even if McKenna is outrighted off the 40-man roster at the end of spring training, as long as he's in the organization, I think we see him this year.
Yeah, ideally, yes. We've seen his last game. I think I don't need Ryan McKenna and Jorge Mateo on this roster together anymore. I need more offense, but I'm not going to fight the Mateo thing anymore. I'm cool with having Colton Cowser or Kyle Stowers kind of fill in very sparingly in Kyle Stowers' instance, very, very sparingly in center field. But I know the Orioles aren't. They're going to want that true center fielder. Hopefully, like Mateo, it shows this organization enough, and he is a great enough athlete that he can handle a move out in center field if they need him out there in time. And maybe that allows the Orioles then to say, hey, we can move on from McKenna. We can give that spot to somebody else. I think that would be ideal. I don't know. We know defense, that the team greatly values defense, right? And I was listening to a show, I think it was last week. It was fantasy focused, but they had a former MLB team employee, a guy who's been like 10 plus years working with a few different MLB teams, specifically in the player development side of things. And he was really talking about, he repeated multiple times, and just the way he was talking about this, how teams will take less for that bat if the defense is there. and how much, especially the better teams, greatly value the defensive aspect of players. And that's for that reason. I don't know. I could see an avenue where Ryan McKenna does stay on this roster. They're going to want somebody that they view, I think, as a true center fielder on this roster. I'm hoping at this point that they view Mateo can be that backup guy, but we'll see.
I think we have seen the last of Ryan McKenna in an Orioles uniform. Other than this rest of the spring training, he's not making this team. I believe he's out of options, so he's going to be DFA'd. Someone will claim him, and maybe that's the trade, the minor trade we're talking about. Maybe they do Ryan McKenna for someone, or he just gets claimed outright. I just, between Cowser, Mateo, Hayes, Hudson Haskin in AAA. I know he's hurt right now, but I Billy Cook, even, like, I just feel like there's much better options. You don't need to we don't need to live with it anymore. So I think we've seen the last of Ryan McKenna. But what we haven't seen the last of is Birdland Sports, and that is our sponsor for today's show. They are a website founded by the guys from over on Section 336. Shout out to that podcast as well. Birdlandsports.com. Get some high quality, really creative designs, as you can see here on the video. Welcome to Burns Land. You got Gunnar Henderson in the Top Gun font. I actually have that shirt. If you go to birdlandsports.com today, you can sign up with your email to get a 20% discount on your first order. And you can see that they're advertising a video game type of shirt that has the dream starting rotation for the Orioles: Burns, Bradish, Rodriguez, Means, Kramer. Hopefully that is our rotation at some point in the season. And it has the quote from Aaron Boone. That could be a bit of a problem. I think Aaron Boone's got bigger fish to fry over in New York right now with their pitching staff. But yeah, birdlandsports.com. Check them out and buy one of their shirts.
And we'll go in now, continuing with our questions from listeners. We'll go back to Dr. 2K, who wants to know, why are relievers so inconsistent from year to year? And he added on to that, should I be worried about any regression from Yanier Cano? And I'll start with Nick on this one.
It's a fun one to think about. So I think the first thing that comes to my mind is that relievers are typically guys that come up as starters, right? They're developed as starters, they're groomed as starters, but they get to AAA or even the big leagues, they can't find success, whether it's the control is still an issue, they can't get through a lineup multiple times, whatever the issue is, there are issues there with their profile, but the stuff is nasty. Like, it's good enough to get big league hitters out, just not through 5 or 6 innings. Like DL Hall, a perfect example when he was here in Baltimore of that. He has the issues like the walks and the high pitch counts that prevented him from going deep into games, but look at what he did out of the Orioles bullpen. He was very good. You harness that as long as possible, but if these guys are kind of seen as like the best of the rest, if you will, like that magic I think is going to run out eventually. The workload is very sporadic as well. So I feel like maybe when things go south, I imagine it's harder to get back on track. And then it's just this snowball effect from there. But we also talk about a lot with prospects. This guy has a great fastball and a big league slider, but the curveball gets rocked. The changeup isn't very good or whatever. Like, I'm thinking of a guy like Carlos Tavera, right off the top of my head. Good fastball, devastating changeup, but a lot of walks, tons of stuff, struggles to put it all together. I've probably said this before, like, just drop your other pitches, go fastball, changeup, reliever. Well, if you're like a 1 or 2 trick pony, eventually hitters are going to see those tricks so often that they're going to learn and they're going to adjust. And the tricks aren't going to be as effective anymore. We also say, like, put them in the bullpen and just go max effort for an inning. Well, instead of being more controlled as like a starter and having a good 10-year run, your body gives out after 3 or 4 years because you're going max effort sporadically. It's the closers and relievers who stick around, I think, for a long time and have great careers. A lot of those guys are 1 or 2 trick ponies as well, but their stuff is just on a whole nother level. And so good hitters can just never adjust to those guys. And those guys are very rare. So I'm sure there's a very detailed, nuanced answers out there to this, but those are just kind of the first reasons that came to the top of my mind when thinking about this. But with Cano, yeah, I do think there's going to be regression. You can expect some regression. I'm not saying that's going to like he's going to be a bad pitcher, but I mean, like his expected ERA and stuff were, I think his expected ERA was more than a run higher than his actual ERA. You could say he kind of maybe outperformed a little bit some of his numbers, but I think he learned what it takes to get through a full season now. So I think his body's going to be better prepared. He's going to be more mentally prepared to get through a full season. So he's probably not going to be as elite as he was last year, but I still think he's going to be a very good reliever here in the AL East.
Yeah, you can even find educated answers to this on our Discord. Please sign up. Its link is in the description below or on our Twitter page as well. But yeah, I think Nick pretty much nailed it. But also, just like Brian Baker probably should have had a worse ERA, but none of his inherited runners ended up scoring. So he can thank his fellow relievers. Sure, smaller sample size. So one bad outing will hurt your line, your ERA more than as a starter who's going multiple innings. And, you know, sometimes your stuff is working when you only have one or two pitches. Sometimes, some years, even Craig Kimbrell, that 1 year was terrible, and he's been pretty good ever since and before then. So if you're a good pitcher, like Nick said, I mean, either your stuff is so good that you can just work through it, or you have to make adjustments, and not everybody can do that.
Yeah, I think you're both right for citing some of the factors, whether it's, the wear and tear that having these short sporadic outings takes, or the volatility that's in small sample sizes. The other thing I think that I would add on to that is that relievers can generally get by on one really dominant pitch. And when that pitch starts to slip, their performance is going to slip. And as I was thinking about this question earlier today, Zach Britton came to mind. Zach Britton was phenomenal for a few years. He had a great career, and I don't want to take anything away from that. But when Britton was at his best, he was throwing a 97-mile-an-hour sinker that hitters could only get on top of if they made contact with it at all. And then he had a couple of injuries, and the velocity dropped, and then he was still a good pitcher, but he wasn't a dominant pitcher after that. So you're just susceptible to those sort of things happening, and they can happen to starters too, but starters have a broader repertoire and maybe a little bit more of an ability to work around some deficiencies in their pitches than relievers have. So that's really the only other thing that comes to mind. But otherwise, I think you guys both touched on it with the short sample sizes and the way outings happen for relievers. And then as for Cano, I agree with Nick. I don't think he will be as dominant as he was last year, but he's still going to be a very capable setup man. And I don't think that any regression that happens is really going to be all that noticeable.
Hope so. Of course, for Cano, this bullpen definitely needs him to step up because RIP Felix for this year. But Mark Bradley here on Twitter has a question and says, if any of the Orioles' projected starting pitchers are ineffective or get injured within the first 60 days, appreciate the specific timeline, who should the Orioles bring up from the minor leagues, if anyone, to be a starter, Bob?
I am going to say Justin Armbruster, just to be a little bit different. I think he's been at AAA the longest between him, Povich, and Chase McDermott, who I think are the top three of Norfolk's rotation coming into this year, unless I'm forgetting someone. But I think he's a little bit underrated, and I think McDermott and Povich have higher ceilings, so why not let them get the innings that they need? Don't bring them up unless they're absolutely ready. But if you need someone in a pinch, I feel like Armbruster's pretty much going to be able to go out there and give you 5-6 innings of 4 or 5 ERA ball, depending on the matchups. So yeah, I'll go with Justin Armbruster, and not just an Org guy.
Yeah, I agree with Bob. I would take Armbruster over McDermott and Povich at this point. Povich has looked excellent in camp. I think he's looked really good, but I also feel like there's still some things for him to work on at AAA. And this is something we're actually going to talk about in our next episode. So I won't say too much here, but I think he's going to need a little bit of time at AAA. The only other guy that I would throw in there, just because I'm curious to see what happens with him, is Julio Teheran. if Tehran does start the year back in Norfolk, then I could see him being that guy that you go to in an emergency over the first 2 months of the season. Maybe because you don't feel like your prospects are ready, or maybe whatever you need to fill at the major league level is a short-term thing. So you don't feel like you have to bring up one of your prospects. You can just bring Tehran up for a spot start or a couple of spot starts or a long relief outing out of the bullpen, whatever it is. But if Tehran does not make the major league roster but sticks in the organization and goes back to Norfolk to start the season, or goes to Norfolk to start the season, then I would put him at the top of the list.
Yeah, I had Armbruster as well. I think that's kind of the I don't want to say obvious answer, but like Bob said, he's got the most experience, and I think he's closest to being big league ready. I would say as well, I know there's a lot of hype around Albert Suarez. I don't know if he doesn't make the major league roster, if the Orioles are going to be able to get him into AAA. But I'm not entirely educated here on his roster status and everything surrounding that, just because I'm not sold on him at all, to be honest. But I hope I'm wrong, and I hope there is more there. But I could see if the Orioles are able to get Suarez into AAA to start the year, then that might be a guy. If things are going well, he's getting the whiffs, he's getting the strikeouts. I know he had a couple of rough innings there recently, but there's a lot of bad, but there's also a lot of good with what we've been able to see out of Suarez so far. So if you can get him into AAA, maybe that's one of the first guys. If you're not entirely ready to bring Justin Armbruster up, and it's early on in the season, like the question said, first 60 days, then maybe you give one of the veterans there. There's the comment there, Brand. I think he's got the next question here as well, but he says Zimmerman. I could see that as well. I didn't include that just because I love the story. I love the guy. We know what Bruce Zimmerman is, but I mean, now that you think about it, if it's a short-term thing, I could also see Bruce Zimmerman as well, just because he is that veteran. He's been in the system for a very long time. Clearly the organization values him in that role. So yeah, I think that's another good option too. If you don't fully believe that Armbruster is quite ready, if it's going to be like a multiple start type thing. But do we go? Is it me? No. Sorry.
Go to Bob for our next question.
It's me. Gosh darn it. Okay. This is from Bran as well. Do you think they move on from Hayes at the trade deadline or sooner? And then I think he also commented here, which kind of goes along with it. How long does Hayes survive if he struggles out of the gate and Cowser takes off? Let's go with Zach.
So for the first part of the question, I don't think Hayes is going anywhere between now and the end of the regular season. If the Orioles really felt like they wanted to move on from him, they probably would have done it by now. And I just think that he seems like the kind of guy that you don't want to subtract out of that clubhouse if you are winning. I remember we had this conversation last year leading up to the trade deadline, which is, do you try to move Austin Hayes? And what I said at the time was that I think that would kind of throw things off in the clubhouse. And you have to weigh that in the middle of the pennant chase. And I think the same thing would apply again this year. So Hayes has not been moved yet. That doesn't mean he's not going to be moved ever, but I think he's here for the 2024 season. Now, for the second part of the question, I think the Orioles are going to need to see a little bit before they pull the switch there to decide they're going to go with Cowser over Hayes, because Hayes is coming off a solid year, not a great year, but a solid year. And Cowser still has not had a lot of major league experience. So they're going to give Hayes time to work things out. I think what will be really interesting to see as you get, to the All-Star break and beyond that is, if Cowser is outperforming Hayes, does that prompt a more traditional platoon split between the two? Does that mean that maybe Hayes plays right field on days when Santander is a DH, which is something I've been advocating for a while? I think Hayes would be much better off in right field when the Orioles are home, but you have to put him in left because he's clearly better out there than Anthony Santander is. So I don't see Hayes going anywhere, and I don't think Cowser is going to do anything, barring an injury in the first couple of months, to change the Orioles' minds on that. But as it gets later into the year, if Cowser is outperforming Hayes and Hayes settles back to pre-2023 levels, I could see him seeing less time in the lineup.
Yeah, I don't see Hayes being moved either. Not this year. Maybe next offseason it's a completely different story. Hopefully, Cowser does take over that role. Hopefully, Kerstad is up as well, taking over some sort of major league role. You've got Enrique Bradfield Jr., who I think is going to be up sooner than probably some people anticipate. You're hoping, will Judd Fabian or Dylan Beavers pop? Like, there are a lot of outfielders coming, and there are a lot of high ceiling outfielders very close. There are like one or two adjustments away, I think, from really threatening to get some major league playing time at the end of this year and early next year. But for this year, I think it's going to be the big three for one more year, at least: Santander, Hayes, and Mullins. There are better defensive options out there than Hayes, obviously, but this team, again, like the Ramon Arias thing, this team values a lot of those veterans, and Hayes has been around for a long time. He's seen the good and the bad. Him and Santander specifically, I think, are two guys. They've seen this organization at its lowest lows, and now they're seeing this organization win, and they are instrumental parts in that. I'm not the biggest Austin Hayes fan myself, but I see why this organization would want him to stick around. And I think it's Ben as well in the chat who's made this point a couple of times, where it kind of feels like the organization is probably, and probably some other more casual fans even, are much higher on Hayes than probably we are as a group. I probably agree with that statement and that sentiment. We see a lot of the younger prospects and we get excited when we want to see those guys take over the role, but I think Hayes, at least for one more year, still has some sort of role on this team. As long as he stays healthy and as long as he doesn't enter those massive slumps that he's prone to, he can make a difference some nights. So I'm fine with one more year with him.
Yeah, as much as I'd love to see them move on from him and trade him for, as long as you could get decent return, I don't see it happening. Not coming off 101 win season, first playoff appearance. They're not going to mix it up too much. But at the same time, when Austin Hayes is considered the weak point in your like best nine you can put out there, that's pretty darn good. You're talking about a good team right there. He's a good player. He's a valuable player. But again, there's more exciting guys with more upside coming up behind him. Those are the guys we like to see. But as long as they're more willing to put him on the IL if he gets banged up, I don't have much of an issue. I think that's really what's harmed him, is he just wants to prove that he's not injury prone. All right, you proved it, Austin. Now, if you're banged up, take 10 days off and get better so you can actually perform when you're on the field. As far as how long can he hold off Colton Cowser, I don't think very long. As far as like full-time playing time, I don't think Austin Hayes is a 162 game player. Even if he is fully healthy, he'll play against all the lefties and probably some of the righties as well. But like Zach said, I'd love to see Santander DH, move Hayes to right field and Cowser to left field against right-handed pitchers sometimes. And I think as long as you're willing to, cycle guys through, move things around, that's where versatility comes in. Cowser can play all three outfield spots. Hayes can kind of play all three outfield spots. You should be able to get these guys at least 4 or 5 games a week altogether. So I'd like to see Cowser just get more and more playing time as the year goes on. Yeah.
So no on the contract extension that he wants. I feel like that's kind of like me asking my boss for a promotion, and they're like, "Yeah, we'll think about it." But behind, when I walk away, they're like, "That was cute that he asked. That's never going to happen."
It's like when the the old school engineer is asking for a contract extension when there's all these college age kids coming out ready to work for less money. Yeah.
We'll go now to this question from Kevin. Will an Oriole strike out 175 times this year? I'll start with Nick.
No. I think Zach pulled up the number before we hopped on, and Gunnar was the closest last year. There are actually, I have the whole list here, actually. There were only a handful of guys in Major League Baseball who struck out more than 175 times. And if Gunnar was the leading strikeout guy on this roster last year, that included this is what 150 something games, 150 games, and that included kind of a brutal stretch there in the beginning of last year. I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna put a lot of faith in Ryan Fuller and Matt Borg-Schulte and say these guys keep the strikeouts a little bit lower this year.
Yeah, no optimistic question from Mr. Kevin Brown in our Discord and Patreon. Yeah, Gunnar Henderson struck out 25.7% of the time last year, over 560 at bats for 159 strikeouts. So he'd have to keep that strikeout rate for like 600 some plate appearances / at bats. I think he's going to improve the strikeout rate, and even though I think he'll get more at bats, and unless Colton Cowser is going to get 600 at bats, I don't see it happening.
Yeah, it's not happening this year. If Gunnar led the team to 159 last year, is what Bob said, a pretty brutal stretch early on that I don't see him repeating this year. You basically have the same group of position players coming back that you had from last year. No one's going to approach 175. And in fact, I actually just went back and I looked at the last two seasons before 2023, 22 and 21. Either one of you have a guess of what the high strikeout total was between 2021 and 2022? And who had it?
Cedric Mullins with 166.
Wrong player, and the number is lower.
I'm going to say 185. I don't know who off the top of my head. 185.
So between the 21 and 22 seasons, the most strikeouts by a single player was Ryan Mountcastle with 161 in 2021. The following year, Mountcastle led the team in strikeouts again. That number was down to 154.
Well, there we go.
Sorry, Kevin.
More fun, maybe hotly debated question here from Tony. Tony asked, bobblehead, floppy hat, or Hawaiian shirt? Bob?
Not really a big fan of memorabilia when it comes to these kind of things. I'm not a floppy hat guy. That I know people love it. It's the bottom of my list. Bobbleheads are cute, but I'd put it second. I go Hawaiian shirt, something I could wear just to be stupid around the house with the kids. I'm not a Hawaiian shirt guy either, but I feel like I could be that cringy dad on purpose with those. So I'll go with that.
I will go the same order because I've been told that I don't look good in floppy hats.
You can't cover up that luscious hair, Zach. Come on.
Yeah, I know on the floppy hat, that's going to end up in the trash if I get that, to be honest. I have an Hawaiian shirt from like 7 or 8 years ago. I don't know how old it is. It's old, but I don't need to. My wife loves when I wear that shirt. Actually, no, I think she tried to throw it away when we moved. I'm only allowed to wear it if I go to Orioles games. And I think it's when I only go to Orioles games without her, I'm allowed to wear that shirt. But yeah, the top of my desk behind my computer here, I've got like 30 bobbleheads up here. I would flip the camera around and show you, but I got some political ones too, and I'm just not going to go there right now. But like 90% of these bobbleheads are like Orioles bobbleheads. I really get to go to Orioles games just because of the distance. And honestly, I'm going to plan my trips around like bobblehead games. Got the Eddie Murray last year. That was the one game I went to. I will stand in line for the bobbleheads. A lot of these come from like Frederick Keys games and Bowie Bay Sox games where I stood in line for like 2 hours to get one of them. I'm a bobblehead guy, not gonna lie.
Nice. Well, I do get a free Gunnar Henderson bobblehead this year as part of a new Flex Plan member. So maybe that'll change my mind on them, but we'll see. Next question is from The Bird is the Word on our Discord. Great username. Do the Orioles make a splash at the trade deadline this year? Nick?
Yes, I hope so. I think I'd like to see them make a big splash for probably another pitcher, right? I don't know who. We'll see how the season shakes out in a couple of months, who the sellers turn up being and which arms become available. But you can make another big splash, and I don't think this farm system would be hit too much. You're not going to be the top farm system maybe anymore if you make a big splash. Maybe not even top 5, but you're going to be top 10 still organization. in baseball, and you can go out and land another guy with some more control. Who knows? Or you know what? The Orioles surprised me with the Corbin Burns trade. Maybe it's not even a guy with control, and we truly have seen this organization turn a corner, and things are going well. And hopefully, Bradish, we see him at some point this year. I still find it very hard to be optimistic about Kyle Bradish. I'm still deathly afraid that we don't see him until late 2025, but I am still holding out a little bit of hope that he comes back, that Means can stay healthy, that this delay was deliberate, and that we see him stay healthy for a full year. Well, once he comes back, at least the majority of the year. Cole Irvin and or Tyler Wells, one of these guys really steps up. Tyler Wells shoved the other day. Would love to see more of that out of him in the rotation this year. We know he's capable of doing it. It'd be a lot of fun to just slam dunk, add another big time starter at the trade deadline and really take this thing home at the end of the year.
I was going to say no, but then I heard Nick's rationale, and now I'm going to switch my answer to yes. Because even as I sit here and think about with Bradish, I don't think the Orioles are going to feel like, even if they get Bradish back, that they're going to get the Kyle Bradish of last year, at least right away. And we saw last year with the Rangers where that depth becomes a necessity down the stretch. So I don't think it's going to be something on par with getting Corbin Burns. And I feel like that if the Orioles do end up making serious moves to try to get Jesus Luzardo at some point, it will be in the offseason. But I could see them making a move for at least a number 2 or number 3 starter at the deadline, and then a better version of Shintaro Fujinami out of the bullpen.
Yeah, I think they'll do something. I think we're kind of at the point now where between the depth of the farm system and the constant contention that we're expecting / hoping for, I think that we're always going to be a player at the trade deadline for the foreseeable future. And I wouldn't expect any different this year. It might not be a starter, especially if Bradish comes back healthy, everyone's healthy along those lines. It could be an ace reliever or two that they try to go out and get to close out games. But I definitely think they'll be making a move of some sort. Connor Norby will be on hug watch around July to August this year.
We'll wrap up this part of the mailbag with a question from Justin, who wants to know, how can you automatically say that Jackson Holliday is automatic when Kobe Mayo has had an objectively better spring? Now, Justin, I have to say, this is deja vu because I think I just had this conversation on Saturday over a very good beer at a very good place in Baltimore that all of us should be going to pretty soon. That's a little tease for something we're going to announce here before too long. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob.
Yeah, I don't know if he's talking to us directly or just like Birdland in general, but I'd say if it was up to us, they'd both be on their slam dunks automatically because they're both killing it. They're both doing a great job. Yeah, Mayo's had a more well-rounded, better spring training, I would say, than Jackson, but they're both holding their own against decent competition in spring training. I think as far as the general vibe, we can say that, yeah, Jackson Holliday's the starting second baseman just based off the Orioles' actions and their comments to the media more than anything. You hear when Mayo's brought up, there's like a thing of, we want to make sure his defense is up to par. Like they're like putting a little bit of doubt on the sense that he'll be there. Whereas with Holliday, it seems to be just like, yep, we're going to give him every chance to win the job. And why that is, I don't know, but that's just the way it is right now. It seems like, I don't know. I wish they would both make the team because I think it would long-term wise be great for this year. And you get them more experience early, they're going to be better late. So if it was up to me, they'd both be there. No doubt.
Agreed. I'm also with certain guys too. I'm just, now that this major league roster is good and it's performing, I have found myself even becoming more patient with certain prospects coming up. I don't know. And Mayo is one of them. And part of that is just because this guy's ceiling is astronomical. And like, I think we talked about last week or our top 50 episode, one of them, but Mayo had a real issue with, you look at the batted ball numbers against, like breaking balls and stuff. They were not very good. He improved on that greatly last year. You got the articles talking about he's improving defensively as well. This guy's making huge strides bit by bit. And he's starting to really put it all together. And it's been amazing to watch. But at the same time, like Holiday has also been on a different path from the moment he was drafted. Like he wasn't the consensus 1-1 pick. This organization, I feel like they try to hide it a little bit and be like, oh, we did not expect him to get to this point. I think they did. I'm starting to really believe that they did feel like he was a cut above the Drew Jones and these other guys at 1-1. And he was on this different path from the start. You're talking about a guy who is sound defensively at shortstop already. Maybe he's not majorly ready for shortstop, but if you move him over to second base, he's going to be more than fine. And this spring, he's got a 129 WRC plus, and he's hitting 300. He's making the routine plays. He's making a few more difficult plays. At least shout out to Andy Koska and other beat reporters out there who are highlighting those aspects when we don't get to watch them on TV because we haven't been able to watch much. But he's hitting bombs off Yusei Kikuchi. He's putting up impressive ABs against Spencer Strider. Like that's huge for this guy. And I think there's an opening there at second base. And with Mayo at third base, there's really not that opening because, like we just talked about with Ramon Arias, I think he's going to be on this roster come opening day. And so you don't want Mayo platooning or playing part-time. Like you want him in the lineup every single day. So I just think it's very easy for the organization to put him back in AAA and say, continue to refine that defense at third base. Maybe we see him get some outfield reps. Maybe we see him play more first base. I know he did a lot last year in Bowie and stuff, but refine that defense. And then you know what? If Ramon Arias isn't providing much value at the major league level and you forced our hand 2 months into the season, then we see Mayo make the leap and he's on the major league roster. But yeah, we do all want the young guys. There's just not enough at bats. There's not enough playing time for all of these guys.
Yeah, I agree with you both. I think there's just a spot there for Holiday. I think the Orioles have been gearing Holiday up to make the opening day roster, whereas I don't want to say Mayo has been a surprise because nothing that I've seen in camp has been a surprise, but I think he's now in that position that Jordan Westburg was in a year ago where it's apparent he's going to force the issue pretty quickly, and the Orioles will bring him up before too long, and I am pretty confident, this is something we're going to get into in our next episode, I'm pretty confident he is going to graduate this year, and he's going to get a lot of major league time. I just don't think it's going to be right away. We'll see. Maybe they do trade Ramon Arias, and certainly this is not something I would wish, but we do have another week left of spring training. And if there's an injury that pops up that leaves an opening for Kobe Mayo, I think he will and should get it. But for right now, I would expect that he's going to be back in AAA to start the year and probably one of the first guys that's up that's going to have an extended opportunity to prove himself in the majors.
I mean, I will say, as soon as I started having my doubts about Mayo making the open day roster, he goes 4 for 4 in a game he starts, and then the next day he's starting at first base. Like that made me go, are they just trying to see, like, can they put him on this opening day roster and get him at bats all around, not just at third base, at first base, DH? We know he was working out in the outfield, so never say never. Who knows what they could pull out of their hat? Maybe they surprise us, but yeah. Either way, Mayo has done nothing but make his value go even higher. They see what he's doing, whether it's now or later, it's coming.
Well said. And we're going to get into a little bit of this in our next episode, which is going to be a mailbag focused on the minor leagues. We're going to talk about a lot of the top prospects in the system, but bounce around the minors a little bit to give you a small taste of what's going to happen in the 2024 season. In the meantime, you can check us out on our many social media channels, including Facebook, Threads, Instagram, X, TikTok, YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube. You can also find us on Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. I will be releasing my second and final projected roster of the spring later this week. You're not going to want to miss that. And be sure to sign up for our Patreon community where you can join for as little as $3 a month, become a paying member, and then at the $5 and $10 levels have access to the exclusive bonus daily coverage we will be providing throughout the regular.
You can also
season.
catch us on Locked On Orioles.
That's correct. Locked On Orioles. We got an opportunity to go on with our friend Connor Newcomb last week, do our minor league draft. Connor will be on with us next week, and we'll talk about that more in our next episode. But you're going to want to go check that out. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. This is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, part of the Believe Podcast Network. So now comes the hard part of trying to stay in character between episodes. Right. Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And we now are going to dive into the second part of our mailbag, which started earlier this week with part one, which was a focus on the major leagues. In part two, we're going to take more great questions from our listeners, but this time with a focus on the minor leagues. So we're going to cover everything from some of the top prospects in the system to players at the lower levels that we think could be poised for breakouts this year, and even get into some of our favorite uniforms and brands in the Orioles farm system. But we're going to start off here with this question from Kevin. Who leads the Orioles minors in home runs this year, and who leads in wins? And I will start with Nick on this one.
I got a boring answer and a fun answer. The boring answer is pitcher wins because it's a boring stat and I don't care about it at all. Garrett Stallings, for reference, Garrett Stallings led all Orioles minor leaguers last year with 10 wins. Huge. I'm going to say Bruce Zimmerman because he's going to be in Norfolk's rotation probably for much of the year, and he can log a bunch of innings, and he's going to have a really good offense supporting him. So that's my answer there. For home runs, though, this is an interesting one to think about. You had Connor Norby in 2022, Kobe Mayo last year, and I'm debating between two this year. It's not going to be Kobe Mayo because he's going to be spending more time in the majors, hopefully. I think Basayo could be the guy because he probably spends a big chunk of the year in Bowie, home run friendly. But I don't know, catching, maybe there's more focus there. I don't know. But that bat is just a monster. But I'm going to go Judd Fabian. I think he was tied with Billy Cook last year with 24, which was tied for the second most in the organization. So I think he takes a step forward this year, hits a few more. And Judd Fabian's the home run king in 2024.
Good answers. For wins, I'm going to go with Trace Bright. I'm going to shout him out after a really awesome performance he had at the spring breakout game. He's probably going to start at AA Bowie, potentially make it up to AAA Norfolk. It's good offenses, good teams there. A lot of wins maybe going to be coming his way, those teams' way in general. So I'll go with him for the wins. And again, it's a stupid stat that doesn't matter, but I understand that, people think that it matters. As far as home runs, I will say Jake Cunningham. I'm going to go with my guy. I think he's going to show out, break out in a big way, and I think a lot of the guys that could contend for this are going to be between AAA and the major leagues. So I just can't trust that they're going to stay in the minor leagues long enough to win this. And yeah, Basayo, definitely an option, but just between the stress fracture and catching, and I know he'll DH a lot and plays first base when he's not catching, but I just feel like I'll hedge my bets there. It very easily could be Basayo, but I'm going to hedge my bets with the guy that's going to start in Aberdeen, maybe, and go with Jake Cunningham.
I'm going to go with Garrett Stallings to repeat as the leader in wins. He's probably going to spend most of the year at Norfolk. I think Norfolk's lineup is going to put up a lot of runs, and Stallings is a guy that can throw a lot of innings, which is going to give him an advantage over those younger starters. I was kind of tempted to go bold and go with Kyle Verbitsky, but there's a little bit more of a track record with Stallings, so I'll take him. And then for home runs, I'm going – if you look at his home run total last year, you're going to wonder why I'm doing this. But when you consider the potential that this guy has, the answer, I think, makes a little bit more sense, and that's Dylan Beavers. Beavers' power total last year over the course of the whole season is probably the only thing you can look at and say, well, that's something he really needs to work on. And I think that as the year went on, we started to see flashes of it. It's just that for whatever reason, it was not translating into home runs when he got to Bowie. He hit for power at Aberdeen. He just didn't hit for power at Bowie for some reason. I think he'll make the adjustments that he has to make. He'll hit home runs at Bowie. And then he'll get to Norfolk at the point in the year where the weather's warmer at Harbor Park. It's a little bit easier to hit home runs there. And settle in somewhere around 24, 26 homers, which seems within his general abilities. And that would probably be enough to lead the organization. Plus, I think he's going to spend the entire year in the minors. So that gives him the advantage over someone like Kobe Mayo, who might have more home runs combined than Beavers between two levels, but he's not going to be in the minors all year.
Is it my turn? Yes. Our main man, Vivek, would like to know how many total Major League starts do you see Chase McDermott and Cade Povich making in 2024? Nick?
I struggled with this one, to be honest. If we're talking combined, I feel like this might be low. You guys tell me if I'm too low or not. I'm going to put the line at like 7.5. I don't know. I just think Povich had a very good spring. He had a great spring breakout game as well, but he was. It's easy to identify some areas in his game, right, that he needs to improve on before getting regular starts in the big leagues. I think McDermott is closer, but he only threw 50 innings in AAA last year. They were really good 50 innings, but you want to see more consistency out of him in the walks, right? Can he consistently go 5-6 plus innings? Can those walk numbers continue to trend downward as they have ever since he's joined the organization? I also think, like we just mentioned, was that last episode, that I wouldn't mind seeing a nice splash at the deadline, getting some sort of acquisition. Just like DL Hall last year, Chase McDermott can be that kind of trade deadline big piece you add to the bullpen. Maybe you add another piece as well, but he is a key piece you can add to the bullpen late in the year. Maybe hopefully you get the division on lock a little early, and maybe you let McDermott get a start. You let some of these younger guys get a couple starts under their belt, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just too optimistic or hopeful about this rotation, but I'm just hoping like Burns and Kramer at least are workhorses. Means can stay healthy and come in and finish the year strong. Tyler Wells, Cole Irvin, at least one of those guys really steps up in a rotation role. Bradish comes back. You make the trade deadline acquisition, and then you really don't have to rely on some of these younger arms this year. You can let them marinate a little bit longer, and they can go compete for a rotation job next year. So.
I think you're about right, Nick, because my number combined is actually lower than yours. I'm going to say 6 between the two. I'm going to go 4 starts for McDermott and 2 for Povich. I think that both have appearances out of the bullpen as well. I agree that I think McDermott is a little bit closer to the major leagues at this point, but as we talked about in our last episode, he's probably not going to be the first guy up this year. You're probably going to give him a little bit more time down in AAA before you give him a taste of the majors, even if that taste is a spot start. And the same thing for Povich. I think that both have looked excellent in camp, but we know with Povich that there are things he has to work on, and I just don't know what effect the automated ball strike system is going to have at the start of the year at AAA. And that's why it wouldn't surprise me and I wouldn't be disappointed if one or both of these guys got off to a little bit of a slow start this year. And I don't think it's necessarily because they've somehow regressed between spring training and the start of the regular season. It's just they're moving into colder weather and they have to deal with this, robot umpire that clearly tilted the scales towards hitters last year. So I think that somewhere in the range of like 6 to 8 is probably a reasonable number, and I'm on the low end of that.
I'm going even lower. I was thinking 5. I just think I'm optimistic as well because we're not the Yankees. So I think we'll have less injuries. I know we already have a couple things going on, but if we have John Means coming back in a month, Bradish in 2 or 3 months, I'm going to stick to that's going to happen. We could make a trade acquisition for a starter around the deadline. You still have Irvin and Wells there who are starting in the rotation, could get pushed to the bullpen, might come back. I just don't know how much room there's going to be. You even have guys like Albert Suarez who might, be a more suitable emergency starter. And just in our last episode, we all said Justin Armbruster is going to be the guy that gets the start if needed early on in the season. So, yeah, I think there will definitely be at least one. So I'd put over 0.5, but I'd put under that 7.5 mark that Nick said, which I think is a good number. It can very easily be over if injury gods are not on our side. So
Like the Yankees, man, they got their best start of the year at Carlos Rodon today, so they're done. Moving on to Matt. Matt asks, this is a good question, I think. What are the most important advanced statistics we look at when evaluating minor league hitters or pitchers? Zach, start with you.
Walk to strikeout numbers, or walk and strikeout percentages, I think are important for both, but I especially like to look at them for younger hitters because, as we've talked about before on our show, between the players, their age, the fact that they're not fully physically developed yet, small sample sizes, when you're looking at guys in short season levels, power numbers are not a great way to gauge them. And batting averages can be highly misleading too. So I like to look at walk to strikeout numbers. WRC plus can help put some things into context about how that player is performing compared to the rest of his league. So I would say that that's another good one for hitters. And then for pitchers, and I'm curious to get your guys' thoughts on FIP and XFIP because I rely on FIP a lot more than I do XFIP. And part of it is I think XFIP and home run to fly ball rate kind of tell the same story sometimes. Whereas FIP, I like to look at for pitchers in the lower levels of the minor leagues because I've watched enough low A baseball over the years to know how inconsistent those defenses can be. And that you have a pitcher who could be getting hurt by that, maybe because they're a high ground ball pitcher, or they happen to be a fly ball pitcher who doesn't give up a lot of home runs, but doesn't have a great outfield behind them. And the last one I would tack onto that for pitchers is infield fly ball rate because the Orioles like to target guys who work the fastball up in the zone. And if the fastball is working, the hitters get under it, it's going to go straight up in the air. Jeff Ponce told us about this when he was on our show, and it was really an eye-opener for me. So to see a hitter, go up against a fastball that's 95, 98, up in the zone, has that late life, if they do make contact, unless they have really good back control, it's going straight up in the air. So that's not going to be a great metric for every pitcher because some guys aren't that kind of pitcher, but for the ones who are, that's a good thing to look at.
great answers. Can't really say it much better than that, but I'll try to put my input in here. Yeah, for hitters, if you just want to look and see one quick number that just describes how they're performing outside, because batting 250 with the 750 OPS is very different in Delmarva than it would be in Aberdeen versus Bowie, et cetera, because WRC plus, you just look at it, 100 is average. It's very easy to see how they're performing because every level, every division, league, whatever, it's all, the context is all there. Beyond that, yeah, walk percentage, strikeout percentage. If you're a power hitter, I want to see you under 25% strikeout rate. I want to see above 8% walk rate because I think 8%, 8.5% is right around average. So those are good numbers. BABIP as well. If someone's really struggling, I'll look at the BABIP just to make sure there's not too much luck involved there. But I think that pretty much it as far as the essentials on the hitting side. And on the pitching side, I also agree. I like FIP more than XFIP, at least in the minor leagues. I think the context is there. Again, strikeout percentage and walk percentage. You want to try to be under 10% walk rate and above 30% strikeout rate, but also to go along with infield fly ball rate. If the strikeout rate is not particularly great, I will look at the ground ball percentage and see if they're getting more outs that way. And just the gap between the strikeout rate and the walk rate matters as well.
Yeah, I think I'm basically going to answer this question without answering the question, because I think a lot of it depends on the player and their profile and like what their future role could be. I think, to be honest, age and level is not an advanced stat; it's a very basic stat. But I think that's first and foremost to put a lot of the stat, whatever stat you're looking at. I think age and level is the first thing that I'm looking at, because that can help put a lot of different things into context. I know, like, a 19-year-old in low A putting up well above average numbers, you put him on your radar. But a 21-year-old in AAA doing the same thing, like, he's probably on your radar already. And if not, you need to put him there as well at that point. But I kind of use that first and foremost. And after that, like, it's the information. I want to look at the information we don't have access to. But if I'm looking at like a player's Fangraphs page, I'm more looking at like trends for a couple of different things. Like for the power hitters or guys that we think have power, is the ISO trending up? What's their batted ball profile look like? Are they hitting fewer ground balls? Are you seeing more line drives, more fly balls? WRC plus, you guys nailed it. I think that's a really good one as well, because everything's contextualized there. Strikeout rate and walk rates, I think, are good initial indicators for like the FCL and DSL guys. We talk about that a lot, but I think as you move up the ranks, oftentimes even those don't tell you the full story, because like if Bob kind of touched on this, if Judd Fabian's rocking a 25% strikeout rate and everything else is fine, like I'm not concerned. But like if Frederick Becasme, all things consistent, he's rocking a 25% strikeout rate now, I'm very concerned. I'm saying, what's going on with Ben Cosme? Same with pitching, like the K to 9 and walks per 9. I hate those numbers. I like the percentages, and I want to see those trending in the right direction too. Like I just remember Zach Lowther. I remember talking about Zach Lowther on this podcast and highlighting the fact that as he was moving up, this is one of our early episodes, as he moved up the organization, the walk rate was steadily going up and the strikeouts were steadily going down. And so like if I'm seeing that, that's telling me that that's a pretty clear sign that more advanced hitters were not chasing his stuff, and he was getting hit harder as he moved up the levels. So just another clear sign that maybe the stuff just wasn't good enough. You beat lower level guys with deception in velo, in the upper levels, not so much. But I think, it's all of those combined are all good ones. It's just really difficult to get a full accurate picture. You gotta watch the guys. You got to compare the scouting reports, and the eye test as well, I think is huge. And then take some of those numbers that you like the best, consider park factors as well, consider their profile, and you got to combine it all there. I think it's a lot to get an accurate picture there of some of these guys, but it's fun. I like doing it. But
go to a question here from Billy B. He wants to know, what is your favorite Orioles minor league affiliate branding, and one of the alternate brands is an acceptable answer. I will start with Bob on this one.
Yeah, shout out to Billy, who's been doing a daily Norfolk hat post on the Discord every day, and there's a lot of cool hats that Norfolk has, but I got to go with the Delmarva Shorebirds. I just like that they go with the black and orange still. I like the logo, but I think the Orioles affiliates all do a pretty good job. So I'm not too picky when it comes to this.
This is a pretty easy one for me. I am going with one of the alternate identities here, and I don't know if they're still doing this or not, to be honest, but my favorite is honestly the Norfolk Coffee, just because like the Tides are a reason why I'm a big baseball fan today. Grew up spending my summers at Harbor Park, so it's a place that means a lot to me. But when the Tides first started doing the Norfolk Coffee games a couple of years ago, I remember the broadcasts shout out to Pete Michaud, voice of the Tides. Maybe not my favorite guy when talking about like player development, but history and painting a picture of a baseball game, he is fantastic at. And he really went into the history of Norfolk and coffee. And I grew up in Suffolk, so again, Suffolk known for peanuts, and you guys have not lived until you've gone to the Suffolk Peanut Fest. Maybe get out there one year. But I did not know that Norfolk's history with coffee, and I love nothing more than a good cup of, bougie local coffee shop coffee. So to learn the history there, and I think the players could choose like hot or iced when they play as the Norfolk Coffee. They had the two variations there. That was my nerdy fun answer there. I got to combine baseball, history, and coffee when the Norfolk Coffee play.
I do like that one. I'd love to get a hot coffee hat.
Yes, that is the correct choice as well. The hot coffee hat.
Those are both good answers between Norfolk and Delmarva. I really like Aberdeen. I really like how they work in the blue to go with the orange. I think those uniforms look really sharp. And then, although I wouldn't say blue and orange is my favorite mix of colors, I'm kind of sticking with this theme here. I love the Norfolk Tides Tidewater Tides throwback hat, the pillbox style. That's very Mets focused. I get it because they were Mets affiliates at the time, but that is just a really cool hat.
Yeah,
No, it is. It is.
I don't like. I'm gonna go off on the Tide stand here. You got me started. I'm not a huge fan of like the green and the Triton rebrand and all that stuff. Riptide is the original guy. I like the old school, the blue wave logo, the classic. But I do get it. You got to move on because that is very closely tied with the Mets. So I do get it. But yeah.
Yeah, and thank you, Billy B, for the question. And speaking of Billy B, he is a podcaster and he has a shirt on birdlandsports.com. He was one of our sponsors tonight. Bird Notice is his podcast. As you can see, a couple of his shirts right here. Very cool. You can also see some On the Verge merch here on birdlandsports.com. If you go to the podcast segment, you got the Elite Talent Pipeline mug and shirt. You have the Raise the Floor, always a popular choice for the shirt, even though it's the old dimensions there at Camden Yards. You have the basic old logo. You have This Is Why on the Verge. Adam Frazier, rest in peace. We haven't come up with anything with our new logo, but still working on that. We'll get around to it. Film study if you're a Ravens fan, 336. It's all there. Check out birdlandsports.com.
All right, and there you go.
I'm really good at knowing when it's my turn to read a question. David from Twitter would like to know, by this time next year, and with all the graduations, do you all think the Orioles have a top 5 farm system? Do more international kids start making top prospect lists? Zach?
Yeah, I'm going to say they still have a top 5, even though Jackson Holiday and Kobe Mayo are going to graduate. Samuel Basayo is just going to move right up that list. I think that by the end of this year, Enrique Bradfield Jr., who was on some top 100 prospects list, is a consensus top 100 guy. And you're going to, I still could see a scenario where you have enough top 100 guys and a strong enough top 10 or a strong enough top 15 to be a top 5 farm system. And then as for the second part of that question, just knowing how prospect lists work, I think it's going to come down to one of two guys having a big year to really put themselves in that conversation. One of them is Frederick Ben-Cosme because there is a little bit of a track record there. He could have time at AA this year. And if he comes out and has a big year, he's going to be generating a lot of prospect buzz nationally going into next year. And the same thing for Braylon Tavera. High signing bonus. You have some outlets like MLB Pipeline that have been high on him for a while. So if he goes to Delmarva and has a really strong first full season, he's going to be getting a lot more attention nationally. So I think it is possible that even if you don't have players who have been signed out of, Dominican Republic or Venezuela that are cracking top 100 lists going into next year, they're going to have a lot more top 10 momentum, and they're going to be talked about a lot more nationally.
I think I go back to the question of is there going to be a big splash or not? And I just kind of think if there is another big time trade and then Holiday, Kauser, Kerstad, and Mayo all graduate, does Chase McDermott graduate? Does Justin Armbruster graduate? I think if we see a ton of graduations from this list, is Connor Norby traded? Or does he stick around in the organization? But obviously, that's a guy who you're watching to potentially be traded this year. He's another top prospect in the system. And you look ahead to the draft, like there's not Orioles obviously not picking at the top of the draft. There's not a ton of like star power in this year's draft. I think you're going to have that first round pick probably be a fringe top 100 guy like Enrique Bradfield Jr. was last year. So I think with all the graduations and possibly another trade or two, maybe it pushes them still within the top 10, but maybe not the top 5. We'll see who graduates or not. But with the international guys, I think if you're talking about top 100 list, I don't know. But I'm thinking of when Baseball America puts out their top 100 and then they put out the articles like, here are all the guys who received votes. Here are the under the radar guys who could pop in the top 100 soon enough. I'm thinking like Braylon Tavera and Thomas Sosa have been getting a lot of love over the last couple of months since the end of last season. If they have big seasons in Delmarva, they could sneak in. I think Luis De Leon started getting some national love as well, started making some noise. If he has a big year in Aberdeen, that's a guy who's going to start sniffing around, I think, top 100 or at least be in initial conversations. We know Fangraphs was initially extremely high on Leandro Arias. So I wonder if he has a big year in Delmarva. If you look at a Fangraphs list, how high does he climb up there? But yeah, I think as far as like an individual Orioles top 30 list, I think next year could be like littered with international guys. There's just, especially the 15 through 30, I think the majority of that list could potentially be international players, which is going to be a lot of fun to see if that ends up proven to be true.
Yeah. Oh, the humanity if the Orioles don't have a top 5 farm system. I think they could cling to a top 5 spot. I think it's going to be really hard for them to keep number 1 again, even if Samuel Basayo is number 1 overall. I mean, the depth is going to take a hit, especially there's so many top 50 guys that the Orioles had. I know they lost Joey Ortiz. We lost Joey Ortiz. We all did, and didn't really affect them too much. But if you lose Holiday, Mayo, Kowser, Kerstad, between prospect fatigue and maybe a trade, Connor Norby, you'd have Basayo, Beavers, Bradfield. I think it's hard for a pitcher to graduate, especially when they're not expected to start the year on the roster. So all those pitchers are going to be available. Matt Horvath, I think, could break out if Fabian cuts down the strikeout rate. There's some guys that could race up the board, but yeah, the second part of the question, the international guys, I do think there's a chance between guys like Luis De Leon, Braylon Tavera, Leandro Arias, even a Thomas Sosa. I feel like if he really just is Ken Griffey Jr. again this year in full season ball, could shoot up lists. But yeah, I think you're going to start to see this year is the year of the pitcher. We've already coined it in the Orioles farm system. Next year will be the year of the international player / star. So yeah, I think somewhere in the 5 to 8 range, I would expect the Orioles to fall, even though they traded one of their first round picks, one of the top 3 picks. I still think the 2 guys that they select near the top, maybe there'll be an interesting development where we get a guy who slipped and fell, not literally, and is potentially at the borderline of a top 100 list.
Well, you mentioned year of the pitcher. We've said that a lot. David from Twitter has noticed that we've said that a lot. So he's asking, who are the starting pitchers at each level that you're most excited to watch in terms of guys who can make an impact in the majors? There's a part 2 to this. What relievers in AAA have the tools to make an impact on the Orioles in the way Yunier Cano did last year? But maybe start with at least the pitchers at each level we're excited to watch as far as like legitimate major league talent guys, I guess. Start with Zach.
So I'll go at AAA with Chase McDermott, just between the way that he improved last year and the way he's looked in camp this year. Go down to AA. I'm really excited to see Trace Bright again, coming off of a strong 2023 season. I think the Orioles have really found another gear with Bright. And I think that by the end of this season, he's going to be talked about as a possible future rotation piece. And then I'll go with 3 arms for combined low A, high A, because I'm still not clear entirely on how that's going to shake out. Jackson Ballmeister, Kiefer Lord, and Luis De Leon. I mentioned on our top 50 countdown a few weeks ago that I think De Leon isn't quite there yet, but I could see De Leon on a top 100 list one day, because he's a lefty with 3 pitches that could grade out as possible, starting pitcher in the major leagues quality type arsenal. And that would include a hard fastball. Ballmeister has a lot of the traits that the Orioles target, and I think he's a little bit ahead in some respects where Bright was when he came into the farm system. And Lord has just come such a long way since the beginning of his college days that I feel like the Orioles are getting him at the right time and can make him even better.
Good answers. Good answers. I would say AAA. I will go with Seth Johnson, even though it's borderline if he starts at AAA or AA. I'm just going to count him as far as AAA just because I think if his stuff is back, he's potentially the best pitching prospect in the system. Down to AA, I'll go with Trace Bright. Again, had such a great outing at the spring breakout game against Pirates. Would love to see him continue to build off of that. Going down to High A Aberdeen, I'll go with Luis De Leon. You said it. We've said it in the past and tonight. Electric arm could be the next big thing as far as pitching in the Orioles system. I will agree. Kiefer Lord for low A, which is where I have him starting. Electric arm again, and we've talked about how the Orioles have been able to get such good, productive players like Alex Pham and Justin Armbruster from guys that they've drafted in the past without that high-end velocity. Well, Kiefer Lord and a bunch of other guys from this past draft have it, so curious to see what they do there. And even down the FCL, I'll say Francisco Morale is the one name I'm looking at there. And as far as relievers, Keegan Gillis, Wanderson Charles, Dylan Hyde. Those are the three guys that I think could surprise and make an impact in the majors in the bullpen.
So when I was thinking about this one, I have the college guys from last year that I haven't seen pitch, I didn't include. So you guys mentioned some of those that I think could be fantastic pitchers. I left them off my list just because I haven't watched them pitch yet, at least at the major league level. And so with guys that I've seen enough times that I feel confident in saying I'm putting money on these guys being major league starters or getting a real opportunity to be. And it's Justin Armbruster, it's Chase McDermott, it's Cade Povich at the AAA level. I'm including all three. I think Armbruster is a sleeper. If you want to call him oatmeal, call him oatmeal. Sometimes you just need a good bowl of oatmeal in the morning. I think it's gross, but some people do. I think Armbruster can be that. McDermott and Povich, obviously we talked about enough. You all mentioned Seth Johnson as well. There's an argument that he is the top pitching prospect in this organization. Trace Bright, I'll parrot that again. He's going to win minor league pitcher of the year prediction. Feeling pretty good about that after that spring breakout performance. That was electric. I'm going to say Brandon Young, if he's got the injury concerns behind him and they don't continue to haunt him in the future. I think he looked really good when he got back to AA last year after his injury. I think he will be an MLB pitcher at some point, as long as, again, the injuries. Luis De Leon, obviously, you guys mentioned him already. 20-year-old who throws mid-90s from the left side. He's got a swing him a slider already. Great feel for changeup. This guy's ahead of schedule. I'm going to throw out a name that I'm falling more in love with here. I'm going to say Juan Nunez. If he can limit the walks, I think he's going to get a lot of national attention this year. He might be undersized, but I think he has some of the better stuff in the system. I think that's my list there with those guys. Juan Nunez being the sleeper, but I'm most excited I'll save that part because that's going to answer the next question. But the 2023 pitching draft class, keep an eye out for it. I think it could be deadly this year.
Agree with that. And to go back to the first part of that question, which I didn't answer, Wanderson Charles is a reliever that I think could be the Cano type guy this year. Go to a question now from Yoni. What level are you guys most excited to watch for the first month before there are promotions? Nick started to touch on this with his last answer, so I'll go back to him to start this question.
Yeah, it's for me, without a doubt, it's Delmarva. It's going to be another year where I think it doesn't matter what level you tune into, you're going to be entertained. Like Norfolk's got huge bats in a rotation that I think we should all be paying pretty close attention to. Bowie's going to be stacked with pitching and Samuel Basayo and Dylan Beavers. Aberdeen's going to have a lot of those draft picks from last year, but Delmarva's going to probably have Braylon Tavera, Leandro Arias, Aaron Estrada, and Thomas Sosa. I really want to see these guys. Braylon Tavera, I know he only got one at bat, and the international guys looked well challenged, we'll say, in that spring breakout game. They're 18, 19-year-old kids. I wasn't expecting a ton in their one at bat in that game under the lights. But Braylon Tavera, I don't know about you guys, but when I saw that at bat, that was the very first time I've seen him in a game. And the dude looks jacked. That's a big kid. I am now excited to watch Braylon Tavera even more. But all those international guys, I want to see if Anderson De Los Santos has the year 2 breakouts. I'm kind of interested in Anutis Mordon, not just because I took him in the minor league draft. I want to see that power. He's posting a lot of really cool clips on Instagram, like the team issued clips where it's got what the pitch was thrown and the exit velo and launch angle. That's really cool. This kid hits the crap out of the ball. I know it's like batting practice or whatever, but he still hits the ball hard. And then you're going to see probably a big group of that 2023 draft class. Levi Wells, Baumeister, maybe Kiefer Lord, Levi Wells. I mentioned Wells, Fruit, Cravey, Nestor Herman, maybe Michael Ferret. Even like I really do enjoy that challenge of trying to identify those younger guys who's got it, who doesn't. Like I'm excited to watch Delmarva that first month. That's where I'm going to be tuned in the most, I think.
Yeah, I think my answer is Delmarva as well, especially on the hitter side. Like, I just want to. It's not really fair because it's our first chance to see these guys like every night out on video, see what they got. But if I could cheat, I'd say hitting side Delmarva, pitching side Bowie.
Yeah, that's fair because I think that you could kind of, go through the different parts of what we think these rosters are going to look like and like all four of them. If I have to go top to bottom and just go overall lineup and pitching staff, I'm going to go with Aberdeen. I'm just really excited to see what some of these guys coming out of the 2023 draft class can do, especially on the position player side, because Bradfield, Horvath, Etzel all looked fantastic coming out of the draft last year. You have Jalen Vasquez, who performed really well. Also, and then I think two guys who we either didn't see much from or that didn't have eye-popping statistics in Jake Cunningham and Tavian Josenberg are going to settle in and do just fine. But when you look at who could be in that rotation at the beginning of the year, De Leon, Jackson Baumeister, Juan Nunez, not to mention Teddy Sharkey coming out of the bullpen, that's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
Yep, absolutely. And I will go with the next question here. Yoni wants to know, what level are you guys? That's already been asked. I'm really good at this. Ben, he would like to know, what prospect outside of the top 50 will break out this year? And you can't say Joshua Lorenzo. Zach.
Zach Fruit. I talked about a little bit on our show recently covering the best of the rest, but I'll get into it again here. The way that his stuff jumped in college, especially over the last year, from when he was in the draft league to his final year at Troy, fastball velocity took a big step forward. The secondary seemed to be coming along. There's definitely going to be work to do there for the Orioles. And I suspect they're going to do what they've done with a lot of guys at a similar profile, which is try to get him to start and try to get him to really work on the pitches that are behind the fastball. So in particular, the slider and the changeup. But I could just see him being someone who comes into the system and really takes off over his first full season because he has the traits the Orioles like. He has made improvements over the last few years. I wanted to include him in my personal top 50, and he fell just short. But I feel like by sometime this summer, he's going to comfortably be inside the top 50 somewhere.
I can't answer the question because my answer was Joshua Lorenzo. No, I just think like that's a gimme. Like 17, he didn't face a single batter, a pitcher younger than him last year in the DSL because he was 16 years old. His brother is a masher in the Dodgers system, top 10 prospect, and his brother got like pennies. Lorenzo got $500,000. I'm all in on this Lorenzo kid. I'm pretty stoked, even if it is just the grainy videos from online that we get of Lorenzo in the FCL this year. I'll eat him up. I want to see what this kid can do.
I'm going to say Preston Johnson. I feel like he's a pitcher that's kind of been forgotten about. He was a decent draft pick a couple years ago, immediately had to get Tommy John surgery. He's coming back this year. I could see him doing some things to get himself up into that top 50 and beyond. Also, a little bit of a sleeper, Steven Acevedo. Really love the way he just improved as the year went on last year. Kind of a make or break year for him this year. Don't be surprised if he does something good.
Like it. I just saw this question. I didn't know this question was added. I think this is our last one, though. If you guys have any thoughts on this from BK, why do the Orioles love cutters so much? They're always trying to teach cutters to prospects without much success so far.
Let's watch Corbin Burns pitch this year, and we might find out the answer because he's got a good one.
Yeah, and I agree with Bob. And just to add on to that, I wouldn't write off the cutter or the Orioles' track record with the cutter off too quickly, because Chase McDermott taking the step forward that he did last year, I think owed a lot to the improvements with his cutter and the fact that he was working that in rather than the changeup. At least that's how he positioned it to us when he was on the show before the season. He was going to be relying on that more instead of his changeup. If they stuck to that plan throughout the year, it showed in the results because McDermott improved in just about every area this year. So there might be some guys who just can't throw a cutter, but I think when you have someone that you feel like you can work it in with, and maybe you get something resembling Corbin Burns, you go for it. And so far, if I have to point to one success story or near success story in the minor leagues, it's McDermott.
Throw the death ball. Let's get ahead of the curve on the death ball. Forget the cutter. Forget the sweeper. Let's get ahead on the new pitch that's going to take the control of baseball.
The more weapons you have in your arsenal, the more you have to work with and mess around with. So I don't mind it. I know Dean Kramer has seen a lot of people criticizing his cutter leading to home runs. But yeah, like I said, let's see what Corbin Burns can do with his cutter because it's really good. And maybe he can teach some guys how to use it better as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are looking forward to seeing that as the regular season plays out. Next week, we will be joined on the show by our friend Connor Newcomb of Locked On Orioles. We just had the opportunity to go on his show recently for the minor league draft. He's going to come on our show as he does before the beginning of every season and go through regular season predictions with us. You're not going to want to miss that. In the meantime, you can find us out there on social media. We are there far and wide: Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, and YouTube. We're also over on Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. And you're going to want to sign up for our Patreon community because starting next week, our bonus daily coverage will return with the beginning of the minor league season. You're going to want to sign up, and you're not going to want to miss that. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, part of the Believe Podcast Network.